because then we can allow people to have a sort of a more frank discussion in the part of the questions and so on. Off we go. So let me introduce Tara properly. Tara is an organisational development consultant, leadership coach, facilitator and trainer with over 20 years of experience with one of the largest professional services firms. And a key strand of her work, of course, involves support to build and maintain resilience and well-being. So Tara, over to you. I'm going to make you the host, as I say, and thank you very much indeed for doing this.
Brilliant, thank you. And hi everybody. I'm joining from vaguely cloudy, sunny Britain, and apologise up front. My Wi-Fi being slightly dodgy. I suddenly turn into a Dalek. Bear with, it'll entertain you until I piggyback or become a parasite on my neighbour's Wi-Fi and rejoin you. But hopefully, fingers crossed. Richard said, I work with Shamps Consulting, and I've founded my business. Prior to that, I worked at a well-known professional services firm. After a very brief sojourn into the accounting world, I realised the error of my ways and joined the HR community. I spent 20 years there working predominantly learning and development OD, but a lot of work with HR business as well. So it feels a bit like you're my home group. So that feels lovely, and hopefully I understand a bit of your world, although I've never done the job that you're doing. I ended up leaving that job after 24 and a half years. The reason I left was because I was struggling hugely with stress, and unfortunately I was really good at hiding that. So rather than anyone helping me or helping me to manage myself, I ended up going from really significant period of stress that led to a breakdown and led to me being diagnosed with depression, anxiety and burnout. And that was what shifted me as a change in career. I wanted to try and change. How can you work today in a culture that doesn't understand or doesn't recognise someone isn't okay? But I think I've answered my question in part. It's really and it's easily as I managed to do for quite some time. So hopefully some of what I share today, it just brings a slightly different perspective to it. Was written pop questions, the chat function. I'm fairly okay with being interrupted. So if you've got a really burning question, feel free to unmute and just interrupt me, because if you've got a question, chances are someone else will have one too. I'm trying fairly quickly, because you're a group of educated HR professionals, and we're not starting from scratch. But I've just put up on, it's known as the mental health continuum. At Shamps we talk mental wealth, partly because if you can get all of your people above the first line, so above axis, flourishing in the sense that their well-being is high, are able to function, to contribute, all of the things that an HR director wants, an HR business partner wants on their agenda: engagement, inclusion, loyalty, performance, productivity, all sit above that line. And we often, when we're talking about mental health, people assume we're talking illness, and we're not talking illness. We're talking how somebody moved below the line. And that somebody can either have a mental health condition or not. It's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. It's about, is somebody showing you any signs that they're struggling? And of course, the situation we're in right now, unprecedented is the word I hear the most. But actually, fundamentally, people are showing levels of anxiety. A recent survey by LinkedIn and the Mental Health Foundation, that 56% of people are feeling more anxious. 24% are struggling with their mental health. 31% are struggling to sleep. 47% are faking being busy because they're scared of losing their jobs. So everything in the current environment is telling us that there is downward pressure that will move people below the line. Below that line, there becomes the issue of somebody is struggling with their mental health, whether or not they have an illness. And I don't to show or explain, I'm sure, to an HR group the change curve, because you'll all be familiar with it and you'll have seen it. And the only reason for sharing it, for me, there are a couple of pertinent points, is that all of us have been plunged into this without any warning. So often in sense of organisational change, or when you're doing anything new, you've had time to plan and prepare. Your leaders have had time to plan and prepare, and so have your managers, and usually therefore further ahead on the change curve than everybody else. And at this stage, we're all in the same place, in that we've all been plunged into this at the same, whilst everybody who is looking managed is hoping as managers and HR teams have the answer. Often you don't yet. And that's causing an added level of complexity and pressure. And I put alongside the change curve just the mental well-being continuum, the sense of, am I flourishing, am I not, am I okay, or am I not okay? And you can see that for a large part of the journey through any change curve, people's mental health is going to be lower than it would otherwise. Whether or not they're resisting change, whether they're in that chaos stage where there's no toilet roll in the shops, the Wi-Fi doesn't work, you know, whatever is causing the chaos, the kids at home and having to homeschool them, we're all in the same stage as everybody else. I've seen people moving through the change curve in relation to the current situation of lockdown. I think as we were starting the call, you know, mentioning that it's taken 7 weeks probably to get to this, you know, which yoga block is going to prop up your laptop so that you can work, which part of the house that you get the best signal in. You know, we've just about got it figured, and most people are starting to move towards that integration phase. And of course, we're now about to throw another one. Easing of lockdown, which appears to be talked about. The media are talking about it as if it's all happening, but there's a huge amount of debate and thought and planning that's going to go into what is going to happen to ease lockdown, and all that will do is kick people into probably yet another version of the change curve, which will run alongside, plus many others, those who've been bereaved, those of us who've got relatives who are vulnerable, those of us who aren't have kids go back to school as I would like them to, whilst the business world is starting to talk about let's return to somewhere approaching normal. You'll all know, I know it's not going to go back to normal, not for a long time, and not possibly never. So that's a context, it doesn't need explaining, but I think it's something that's easily forgotten. Certainly when I work with leaders and managers, they're just so focused on getting their own world right. They haven't stopped to think about where are others in this, and what are they looking to me for? And as HR teams, as you're looking to plan, you know, how many people can we have in the building? Is it going to be 15%? Is it 25%? Is it 50%? How are they going to use the toilets? How are they going to use the lifts? All of that sort of processing is being done right now. What potentially might be missed is, and how are we going to ensure that our people are okay? Not by everybody, and it will be your agenda, but it's often the thing that gets put to the bottom of the pile. And I've also brought this up, and again, I'm sure you've seen it before. I spend most of my time talking to people about the relationship between performance and pressure, and often how to navigate the two. And usually the wellbeing agenda is always vying for attention with the performance agenda. And often managers, leaders who are trying they're trying to maintain performance, they're often putting the foot down on the performance pedal at the expense of the well-being pedal, or they're trying to on well-being and then they lose a focus on performance. And the challenge, even more coronavirus, is very much about how can we get people to help see that you can, because they're mutually, not exclusive, mutually connected. If we can push pressure to a point, you will push performance. And the pressure and performance curve that's on screen in front of you, you know, the boredom and the comfort zones, the comfort zone is really important in that's where people get some rest and recharge. The stretch zone is where we're all that in that superhuman stage, we're under so much pressure, but we're able to fly. And human beings love the stretch zone. We get learning, we get growth. Organisers love the stretch zone because you get extra performance. It's the zone of engagement. But what we often miss, or we maybe fall into what they call the zone of delusion, that we assume we can keep on going at that level of performance as pressure mounts. The strain zone is where we can tolerate a bit of time in strain. When we get to the stage where we're under so much pressure, we start to feel overwhelmed, but we need to be able to navigate and get enough comfort to allow us to rest and recharge. And I'm a big tennis fan. Any professional tennis player, you'll know, has a routine that is focused on ensuring they get enough rest and recharge, enough time in their comfort zone to allow them to operate at an optimum level of performance ongoing. Whereas in the corporate world, we often don't. We think we can stay strain ad infinitum. Strain becomes our new home. We recognise strain and we don't think that there's a different way. And before coronavirus, every organisation I worked with in the financial services sector, in retail sectors, in insurance sectors, almost every sector we worked with, people were telling us they were spending most of their time in strain because everyone's being asked to, more with less. Global working meant, pushing the time boundaries and so many challenges. And that was before this hit. Strain is the home of fatigue, judgment, and making, and a myriad of other things. And if an individual doesn't take action to get what they need, then the place they'll go next is this. It's where they ended up. And the crisis zone is where you're exhausted, burnout and breakdown happens. And all pressures that are being added by coronavirus can only do one thing, particularly, which is move everything to the right curve. One who was telling me and you was operating in strain prior to this, potentially is moving towards crisis. It doesn't necessarily make itself hugely the same survey found that people are faking being busy. I think, as I said, to avoid losing their job or feeling that their job is insecure, but that move towards crisis is much, much harder to get out of. Typically, it's when HR are asked to get involved, but by then, someone's gone quite far down that line. So I probably don't need to say any more about that than to say the risk is most definitely about crisis zone. And as we go into whatever normal is going to be, human beings have been operating at an increased level of alertness for at least 6 weeks. And that level of alertness has got a whole heap of hormones attached to it in terms of cortisol and adrenaline, and yes, endorphins that might help, but the parasympathetic nervous system hasn't been activated enough. We're running on our sympathetic nervous system. We're on a heightened state of alert and arousal. And if people can't bring that down, there is an even greater risk of burnout, regardless of what else is going on. So it's a bit of a melting pot from a mental wealth point of view, which I'm sure you're already hugely aware of. And the warning signs I've just popped up on the slide are warning signs that are focused around remote working. That you'll see some of those, but they're the ones that develop in strain more so than crisis. But even there, you can start to look and see can be confused very easily with performance problems. And whilst at the moment that surveys found activity hasn't decreased hugely, albeit with only a 2,000 population survey, not masses of people, but productivity hasn't dropped yet, and I wouldn't expect it to necessarily, because when people they can still deliver a pretty high level of performance, but they are early warning signs and they often do get missed because they're quite subtle and typical. I get somebody knocking on my door. So in the sense of managing, and I know part of the job of HR is how can you enable and facilitate your managers and leaders they need to do to give you some ground cover. A lot of the conversation that managing remotely is just managing. There's some amplification needed on communication, on how they track work and productivity. Hugely important how they're building trust and how they're maintaining morale. I think there's been a sense of camaraderie of we're all in this up till now, but as potentially organisations move into a situation where some people might be back in the workplace, others won't be. Some people will be wanting to be back in the workplace and not allowed to. Others will be forced back into the workplace and will be at home. There's going to be a melting pot of difference that will make that challenge even harder, I think, for managers and leaders. And partly, again, because they haven't had planning, but also because the boundaries are being so blurred. Sorry, they keep knocking at the door. And it's new to everybody. So everyone is having to grapple with something they haven't got a blueprint for. I'm also finding you're seeing people as you don't see them or haven't seen them before, and that you're seeing. My most embarrassing moment was when I realised I had underwear hanging behind me on a Zoom call, and I got up or I moved, and there for everybody to see was that, and it just hadn't occurred to me. And I'm sure you've all had the same sorts of embarrassing moments as the bloke who won't stop knocking at the door to leave me. I don't know what crap I've bought on the internet, but probably something I really don't need. So I saw a brilliant article yesterday, which was by Simon Jack, the BBC business editor. And he was talking really interestingly about, there are certain things that every employer is going to need to think about, which I wholeheartedly agree. Do your employees feel safe enough in the workplace to actually come in and work? How do you make sure that what you've done will stand up should something go wrong and that you won't be sued? How do you manage the cost of it? Because you're going to have to start potentially reconfiguring. A client of mine in Italy is talking about stripping out the office to ensure that their desks are far enough apart. And how do you build up your customers' confidence if you're a B2C organisation, that your customers will actually want to come back and buy? And some really interesting challenges. And again, for me, very, very pertinent and very much at the head level, I guess, of the macro, what needs to happen. The piece for me that becomes quite, I think, important is that as we go back into this world that, I personally have quite a base level of anxiety. I don't want to travel into London. So if I was working for an employer who needed me to go into London, it would take a lot to get me to do it, because I feel quite unsafe when I'm out, even shopping, took me about 3 hours to recover from, because people were a bit closer than they should have been. So not everybody is champing at the bit. There are some who are champing at the bit. But for me, the question then becomes almost the sort of, are you making business critical decisions or human critical decisions? In the sense that, yes, safety is important, but where's the psychological safety and who's looking after that? That I might know that I have got 2 meter distance from everybody, for example, and you might have set it up so that only one person can go into the toilet at any one time, and therefore I'm physically safe, but I might not feel emotionally or psychologically safe. And what can you do to create a psychologically safe workplace? For me, very much the purview, that's the word I'm looking for, of the HR community. And there's also something about business as usual probably can't be the same. So in what way and how can you relax performance expectations sufficiently to allow people to relax, to allow them to come in and give you their best? Because we know that the extra pressure is going to push people further and further towards the place that you don't want them to be. But obviously you're a business, so it can't be that there are no performance expectations, but how can you relax them? How do you communicate those in terms of outcomes? Because you will still have people working at home, and it won't be easy to tell what they're actually doing. It isn't about hours in. People are actually starting to work more hours because they're feeling pressure from managers to be online and to respond. I think there's something like 15% of people logging on before 7 a.m. and nearly 20% of people working after 7 p.m. in the sense that people feel obliged to be online. So how can you help manage that as a risk factor for burnout too? And I guess fundamentally, how do you build the connection and trust? Because until now, I think we have all been in this together, but going forward, you're going to have different populations in different places. And it necessarily feel fair. And therefore that often leads to anxieties, worries, which create the same physiological response as stress in the body. So just having that oversight for me feels really, really important. And the sort of human critical decisions around in thinking back or in thinking about who comes back into the workplace, as well as the business critical roles. Well, who's been isolating at home on their own for 7 weeks actually is far more at risk of a mental health issue right now because they aren't getting human contact and company. Is it more important to bring those back in? Is it more important than people who are away from family and friends or who don't have any outside space? In what way does your business make its decisions about who comes back when, in that mental wealth sense rather than just the business critical sense? I talk a lot with organisations about a mental wealth strategy. Usually there are 5 elements to it. I think they still stand true, very much so where we are at the moment, in the sense that if you want a culture that encourages and actively support people and their mental, which feels to me more important now than ever. Something about making it clear, which is about stating very huge expectations that you have of people to look after their mental health as much as physical health. And often it needs to be said because it's assumed to be something we don't talk about, and that we to stay strong and not show our vulnerability. You know, the person who doesn't actually want to come in, I've had many people talking to me who don't actually want to go back because they're scared of bringing back the virus to their wife and children. Can't say it. So it becomes a particular issue. How does an employer make it clear the way, ensuring that your managers are becoming leaders because they need to be. You can't cover everybody. Start rolling when they're not much than anybody else. What do they need? How do you make so that everyone knows how to look after themselves? There's things out there about, you know, self-care. I've often seen organisations say, brilliant, look after yourself, but they do nothing else, and then it pretty much feels like that's your responsibility. We don't have any, which is never intended, but is often the impact. Making it easy is about ensuring that people can meet their own needs and have some autonomy about the way in which doing this. And making it matter is very much about shouting out the people who do it well. Celebrating, no, I don't mean by pay, but recognising leaders, influencers, people who have prioritised mental health for the long term, and ensuring that everybody is what you want for success in the organisation. So I think anything I've talked about will be new to you. It feels important sometimes to remind ourselves. And the final piece I wanted to share with you, I'm just conscious of time, I don't want to talk for too long, I have no time for questions. This is based on the New Economics Foundation 5 Ways to Wellbeing. A lot of what I've talked about and mental health problems are often linked to the stress response being triggered in the body, which fills us full of negative stress hormones. These 5, so it's connecting with other people, learning something new, exercising the kindness and noticing or being mindful. All of these 5, if done well, create happy in place of the stress hormone, counter the response. And if you can thinking about in your organization how you build plans in place that give a greater likelihood of these clean activities being done in, you've got a brilliant foundation that you're doing some things that go to boosting the mental wealth collectively, as well as asking individuals to do that for themselves. So I'm going to shut up there and say, let's open it for questions. So I don't know whether I do that, Richard. I think you've stopped recording. There you go.
Apologies. Yeah, there we go. So everyone's unmuted. So either send something via chat, or if somebody wants to start us off, please do. I'm just going to stop the recording as well. There we go.